Hey guys, my name is Derek Yost, and today I'm here to show you how to take the big, intricate, scary design process of building an airplane that takes up to many years, and I'm here to simplify it for you into a few simple steps that's going to take you about the time span of less than 2 hours. And with the skills I'm going to show you today in Microsoft Excel, you're going to be able to build a plane before lunch. Enjoy the video. Now before we get going, I want to show you guys the layout of my workbook and explain a few things that should make your lives easier. Each time I show you a new tab, take a moment to pause the video and use my spreadsheets to model yours. First we have my Aerodynamic sheet. Keep in mind that at cruising altitude, I have mine set for a business jet at 45,000 feet, and yours can obviously be different. Also keep in mind that I'll explain all of these variables to you and their significance later on. Now for weight. Pause. Landing. Pause. Takeoff, climb, and ceiling. Pause. Level flight. Tail and stabilizers, and performance. Now for those of you who don't have the most experience with Microsoft Excel, I'm going to show you all the things you need to know to make your workbook. First I'm going to open up a new document. Now I'm going to show you guys how to make formulas as well as link formulas across different worksheets. First we're going to start with a basic variable A, and now I'm going to set that equal to 50. I'm going to open up sheet 2 and go with variable B and set it equal to 100. Now I'm going to go to my third sheet and have variable C equal A plus B. So we're going to put an equal sign here, go back to sheet 1, click on the value of A, now hit plus, now go to sheet 2, click on the value of B, now hit enter. Notice how sheet 3, variable C, now equals 150. If I go back to sheet 1 and make A equal 500 instead of 50, the value on sheet 3 is now 600. 500 plus 100. Now we can make this a little bit more complicated. Well, let's go back to sheet 1. We'll have a new variable A. Go to sheet 2, have a new variable B. In sheet 3, have a new variable C. This time let's model the Pythagorean theorem and have the square root of A squared plus B squared equals C. So we'll set A equal to 3, B equal to 4, and C equal to the square root of, go back to sheet 1, square this value, plus sheet 2, square the B value, and that should equal 5. There we go. Now, since a lot of the values are going to be changing throughout this design process, and many of them are reliant upon each other, we need to set up Microsoft Excel so that it will allow circular iterations. What this means is that multiple numbers could be linked back to each other through similar equations. It would almost be like using a word to define itself. So what we're going to do is we're going to go up to File here, and we're going to come down to Options. And if you come over here, Formulas, all you need to do is click this box, Enable Iterative Calculation. And this is the setting I use, 200 for maximum iterations, 0.001 for maximum change. You should be all set. Click OK. And basically what that means is if I wanted, I could, instead of A being 3, I could have A equal C, and it would just continue to loop back until there were no more change. And this is where the change stops. So now that we have our basic skills, let's begin. Before anything can get done, we have to start with our level 1 requirements. These, in layman's terms, are the things you want out of your airplane. If you take a look, mine are, for starters, range, set to 8,000 miles, takeoff and landing distance, which is going to be less than 3,000 feet. If you look at landing, it's 2,800. And payload, set to 5,040 pounds. That's 18 people on the plane, 3 crew, 15 passengers at 180 pounds apiece, and 100 pounds of luggage for each of these people. Those are rough estimates based on what I think should be on my plane. Now where this all begins to take shape, literally, is with the fuselage. From the fuselage, you can calculate an initial weight and start to figure out some landing details, as well as get a preliminary wing area and span. From here, you recycle that new information back into the total weight of your airplane using circular iterations from before. If you take a look here on my right, I have a design of my fuselage shape. And take a note, it helps to use grid paper because then you can figure out the side and top area of your fuselage. Now I'll take a second to actually draw these out for you guys so that you can get an idea of what kind of process I went through. So here I'm going to draw the side view of the airplane, just a rough side view. And then here would be a top view. And from here what we're going to do is calculate the area of the side and the area of the top. And for my plane, the area of the side was approximately 880 square feet, and the top was 700 square feet. So from there, to calculate the area of your fuselage approximately, you're going to do area of the top plus the area of the side times 1.7. And from there, you're going to pop those into your Excel workbook. And to get a weight for your fuselage, you're going to take your total area times 5 equals your weight of the fuselage. Now if you guys notice, some of my values don't have any highlighting on them, as you can see up here. Some of them have orange highlighting, as you can see here, and some of them have green highlighting. The green highlighting represents the level 1 requirements, as well as values I pulled off the internet and other fixed values for airplanes such as wing shape, other things like engine weight, so on and so forth. The orange values are calculated values, and as you can see, we calculated the area of the fuselage and the weight of the fuselage just now. From there, what we're going to have to do is make a column for wing weight and weight of fuel and total weight. The total weight box is the box you're going to be using for all the other weights that are going to be calculated in this process. It's going to be continually changing because of the circular iterations, but you're going to need to use this as your weight. Also keep in mind that your total weight is going to be a total of the weight of the fuselage plus the weight of the payload plus the weight of the engine plus your wing weight plus your weight of fuel. And you can see that noted here as B12 plus B15 plus B18 plus B21 plus B24. You're not going to select the weight of your engine until later when we determine how much thrust we're going to need from the engine. So now that you've calculated the weight of the fuselage that you're going to be using and decided on a payload, keep your current weight in mind as we move over to the landing section of our workbook. And now we're going to solve for the wing details based on the runway length that we want our planes to be outfitted for. The variables outlined in my spreadsheet include W over S, which is weight over wing area, which we're going to be solving for the wing area in just a moment. V stall, which is the stall velocity, and then I have it computed in miles per hour over here. VTD, which is the velocity your plane will be touching down with when it lands. And then JA and JT, which are two values we will solve for, which help us solve for SG, which is the ground distance that your plane will travel once it touches down, and S free roll, SFR, which is the free rolling distance estimated with the response time of your pilot. I started by laying out weight to wing area ratios of 70 to 150 and doing the calculations for all of them to see what the best wing area would be if I wanted my runway to be 3,000 feet. The purpose for this was to enable my business jet to land in most private airports. From each W over S we can calculate V stall, which is equal to the square root of W over S times 2 divided by rho CL max landing. CL max landing is the coefficient of lift when landing. This means that 100% of your flaps are going to be deployed on the airplane. So as you can see here, I've already calculated a CL max based on values I got off the internet. But for now, we're going to take an estimate value of 1.2 instead of my value of 1.07. From there, we can calculate our landing value by adding 1.3 to our CL max. Similarly, for takeoff, we can calculate that by adding 0.91, which signifies 70% flaps. Once we have our CL max landing estimate, we plug it into our equation. Now, for those of you wondering what this rho is right here, that is our air density at whatever altitude we're landing at. For simplicity's sake, in this workbook, I have us landing at sea level, so that value is going to remain constant at 0.00238. Since we know our CL max landing and our rho value, all we have to do now is plug in a new value of W over S for each V stall we calculate. And as you can see here, each of the equations look very similar. They're only just plugging in a new value of W over S. Once you find your V stalls, you can translate them from feet per second into miles per hour simply by multiplying them times this constant right here. So all you have to do is multiply this cell right here times 0.681818. Also keep in mind that you don't have to translate that from feet per second to miles per hour. I just do it because I like to get an idea of what it's going to be. Now moving on to your touchdown velocity, we're going to also be doing that in feet per second. Your touchdown velocity is 10% greater than your stall velocity. So you take VTD is equal to 1.1 times V stall. And as you can see here, I have V stall, for example, in cell C3. Now VTD is calculated as 1.1 times C3, and for the next one it's 1.1 times C4, 1.1 times C5, and so on and so forth down the line. Now let's keep moving and solve for JA, which is going to be equal to rho times CD naught, which is the base drag coefficient, over 2 times W over S. And just like before, since we don't have a value of CD0 yet, we're going to start by estimating it at 0.02. As you can see here, mine's already been solved for. That's why I put a note here saying updated. You might want to put a note to yourselves saying that you need to update it later, but start with 0.02 for your value of CD0. And similarly to before, we're just going to plug it in. And as you can see, not much changes aside from the W over S value that you're going to be plugging in for each respective column. And also, side note, to keep things less confusing and a little bit more simple for me, what I like to do is sometimes when I have these constant values, I like to keep them in the same worksheet so that I can see them. And so I just use this column right here and plug it in for my JA value. So it's going to be K7, as you can see noted right here. And what I did was I just took this box right here and set it equal to the same CD0 value in the other worksheet. Now after solving for JA with our estimated CD0 value, we can go solve SG minus SFR, which basically means counting out the response time of the pilot, how far is the aircraft going to travel on the ground before coming to a stop. So SG minus SFR equals 1 over 2GJA times the natural log of 1 plus JA over JT times velocity at touchdown squared. Now JT is a constant used for your reverse thrusters in the engine, which we're going to set to an approximate value of 0.4, and G is also your force of gravity at 32.2. As we wrap up our landing worksheet, all we need to do now in order to get our runway length is to solve for SFR. SFR can be found by taking our touchdown velocity and multiplying it times our estimated pilot response time, because this is the free roll distance of the plane while the pilot is reacting to the landing. So all we need to do is take touchdown velocity multiplied times, well, my pilot response time is going to be 3 seconds, so I have it multiplied times 3. And we just do that all the way down the line for each value of W over S. And then to get runway length, all we need to do is add SFR to SG minus SFR, and we find our runway length for each value of W over S. Once we have each runway calculated for each W over S value, we can determine what our W over S needs to be for your desired runway. And from here, we can determine what the wing area you are going to need is by setting wing area equal to current weight and then dividing that by W over S. So, for example, your wing area is going to be equal to your current weight divided by W over S. And this W over S is going to be selected based upon the runway length you want. So for me, I have a W over S value of 130. And now you come on over to Aerodynamics and you set S equal to current weight divided by your W over S from landing. Now that we have a wing area selected, let's do some more wing calculations. We're going to start by setting our aspect ratio, which is noted right here. My recommendation would be to stick with a range of 6 to 9. If you are more concerned with maneuverability and storage efficiency, I'd recommend a lower aspect ratio wing. But if you are more concerned with efficiency and long range, I'd recommend a higher aspect ratio. For example, my long range business jet model is using an 8.5 aspect ratio wing. And also, for anyone who is unclear, the aspect ratio of a wing is its span squared divided by the area. From here we can now solve for our wingspan. We simply set aspect ratio equal to span squared over area. And now by multiplying aspect ratio times the span and taking the square root, we can get our wingspan. And as you can see here for wingspan, it is the square root of d6, which is my wing area, times b3, which is my aspect ratio. Continuing on, now we can solve for the chords of the wings. These will come in handy in some further calculations. The three values we're going to be solving for are the average chord, the root chord, and the tip chord. The average chord can be found by simply dividing the wing area by the span, like so. And C average can be noted right here. And as you can see, it is simply d6 divided by d3, which is which is area divided by span. Next, we can solve for the root chord with the constant value tau. And this is the tau of the wing right here, and it's set to 0.8. Now by using the equation S equals B over 2 times root chord plus tau root chord, and when we rearrange this, we can find that it's actually 2S over B equals 1.8 root chord. And as you can see right here, the root chord value equals 2 times D9 divided by 1 plus D12. And lastly, we can use the equation S equals B times root chord plus tip chord divided by 2 to solve for the tip chord. So again, that equation is S equals B times root chord plus tip chord divided by 2. And when we simplify that and rearrange it, it actually comes out to 2 times the area divided by the span minus the root chord equals the tip chord. And as you can see right here, the tip chord is noted by 2 times S divided by B minus the tip chord. Now that we've solved for the chords of our wingspan, and our wing area, we can head to the internet to select an airfoil for our airplane. So the website I went to find my airfoil data was airfoiltools.com. Where I went from here was to find airfoils with high lift to drag ratios, because the main goal of my design is to fly long range. The airfoil that I came up with was the G3BL0 airfoil. Obviously, for your design, you can go with a different route and choose another airfoil. I'm just going to model with the one that I chose. If we take a look, you're going to notice 4 graphs here on the screen, and we're going to need the data from the lift coefficient divided by alpha graph, which is this one noted right here, CL over alpha. Now we're going to take an approximate value of the slope of the straightest part of the line. So right here is going to be our approximate slope. And my slope was approximately 0.1 if you see here in my spreadsheet. Once we do that, we're going to correct this value slightly by using an aspect ratio correction. First, we're going to calculate our efficiency factor, which is noted by E in my spreadsheet right here. We can solve for E with the equation E equals 1.78 times 1 minus 0.045 times the aspect ratio raised to 0.68 minus 0.64. So written out, that's going to look like this. E equals 1.78 times 1 minus 0.045 multiplied times the aspect ratio raised to the 0.68 minus 0.64. And if you look here, you'll see that E is equal to 1.78 times 1 minus 0.045 times B3, which is the aspect ratio, raised to the 0.68 minus 0.64. Now that we've solved for our efficiency factor, we need to solve for our value constant K, which is equal to 1 over pi efficiency factor aspect ratio. So written out, K equals 1 over pi times our efficiency factor times our aspect ratio, which if you look here on the spreadsheet, you can see 1 divided by pi multiplied times E multiplied times the aspect ratio. After solving for K, we can now use our aspect ratio correction equation to solve for our new letter A. Soon we will use our new letter A to solve for our new lift coefficient. We're going to take A naught and then solve for A. So what we're going to do is take A and set it equal to A naught divided by 1 plus K times A naught. And as you can see here, our new value of A is equal to A naught, which is B12, divided by 1 plus B9 times B12, which is A naught times K. Now in order to solve for our actual lift coefficient value, we need two more values from our airfoil data, and they're going to be noted in the spreadsheet as alpha L equals 0 and alpha max. And these two values note two values of angles of attack of the airplane. And for those of you who are unfamiliar with what an angle of attack is, here's a visual representation. We're going to have the body of our airplane and the wing, and this dotted line represents the chord line of the wing, and this dotted line represents the airstream, and this angle right here is our angle of attack. So now if you look at the airfoil data, the zero lift angle will be found when CL equals 0. So when we go up here, we'll see in the left column you have your alpha, and the right column you have CL. If you scroll down, you can get an approximate representation of when CL equals 0 at about 0.2 for this airfoil. The stall angle can be found once the straight line from the graph we talked about before, which is right here, CL over alpha, starts to curve at the top. So right about here at alpha equals 11 is the approximate stall angle. And once we have those two values, we can now plug them into another equation to find our actual coefficient of lift. This is going to be written as coefficient of lift, CL, equals A times alpha minus alpha L equals 0. So if you look here, coefficient of lift equals A times alpha minus alpha L equals 0. And this will give us our new coefficient of lift. So if you take a look here, our new coefficient of lift is noted as B15, which is our A, times B21 minus B18, which is alpha max minus alpha L equals 0. After we finish the airfoil data, we can continue on to determine what engine we're going to need on our airplane. This can be determined by the amount of thrust we'll require to get our plane off the ground in the desired runway distance. We'll start over in the takeoff worksheet with our desired runway length. As you can see here, mine is noted in green at 3,000 feet. From here, we'll use an equation to determine our thrust to weight ratio, which is going to be noted as T over W, as you can see here in B6. And this equation right here, D equals 1.44 times W over S divided by rho, which is our air density, times G, which is our force of gravity, 3.22, times CL max takeoff, times T over W. Now we'll rearrange this equation so that T over W now takes the place of D, and as you can see here in the T over W section of my worksheet, we have 1.44 times landing B9, which is our W over S, divided by B4, which is right here, our takeoff distance, times landing K3 times landing K5, which are landing K3 force of gravity and landing landing L5, which is our rho at sea level, times our aerodynamics at cruising altitude B30, which is our CL max takeoff value right here. And with this T over W value, we can now just take T over W and multiply it times our current weight. And as you'll see here for our thrust, which is noted as T, the equation is B7, which is our T over W, multiplied times weight B27, which is our current weight. And that will yield the thrust you will need to take off in the distance you want. And now, since I'm not going to teach you how to build an engine before lunch, we're going to once again head to the internet to go engine shopping. 3 companies I would look to for engines, or at least would be my recommendation, would be Rolls-Royce, GE, or Pratt & Whitney. Personally, I decided on the BR725 from Rolls-Royce because of its high thrust capabilities. As you can see here, it has 16,900 pounds of thrust per engine, which totaled would be 33,800 pounds of thrust. With the 2 engines, this definitely exceeds my necessary thrust. As you can see right here, all I needed was 29,873 pounds. And once I decided on my engine, now we can take the weight of these 2 engines, which I found here on this website, on Wikipedia, at about, let's call it 4,900 pounds apiece. And now you take both of those and you add them into your weight. And now that goes back into our total weight cell because it gets added in. Now the only other weight value we really need to solve for is the fuel. We can also add the weights of the tail and stabilizers at the end, but for now their impact is rather negligible. Also note that you may need to change your engine selection based on the amount of fuel we're going to need, but you can always figure that out later. We can start this process by solving for the value of the velocity that the plane is going to be traveling at when it's trying to reach optimum range. The equation we're going to be using here is our best range equation, which is in the level flight section of our workbook. And that equation is VBR, or V best range, equals 2 times W over S divided by rho raised to the 1/2 multiplied by 3K divided by CD naught raised to the 1/4. If you look right here, that exact equation is noted in the VBR section of our level flight worksheet. And one more time, that equation is VBR equals 2 times W over S divided by rho to the 1/2 multiplied by 3K divided by CD naught to the 1/4. And also remember, right now we're still using an estimated value for CD naught, but we're going to be updating that very soon. Some of you also might be wondering what MDR means right below VBR here. MDR represents the drag rise Mach, which means if your VBR value is above the speed of sound at the respective altitude that your plane will be flying, we're going to now adjust that velocity and take 70% of the speed of sound and call that our MDR, or our drag rise Mach. We can find this by using an equation to find the speed of sound and multiplying it times 0.7. So speed of sound equals the square root of gamma times R times the temperature. And to find this temperature, you can click on the link down in the description, which includes a table of standard atmospheric values. Once you find your temperature for your respective altitude, you're going to need to add 459.6 to your Fahrenheit value in order to get an accurate value for your temperature. And again, if you just look at the equation right here, we have 0.7, which is our 70% of our Mach value, times the square root of gamma, which is equal to 1.4, times R, which is equal to 1716, times my temperature, which is negative 69.7, plus our constant value of 459.6. So again, simply written out, our MDR value can be written as 0.7 times speed of sound. Also, another thing, I converted my values from feet per second to miles per hour just so I could get a general idea of how fast that was going to be, because I don't calculate things in feet per second very often. I see things in miles per hour. So that's just my personal preference, but obviously it's your guys' workbooks, so you can do whatever you want with it. So now that we have a velocity that we're going to be cruising at, whether it be your VBR, which was your calculated best range velocity, or your drag rise Mach velocity, we can now solve for our Reynolds number, coefficient of friction, and CD naught, which are all very critical in solving for the rest of our information for this aircraft. So we can head on over to Aerodynamics at cruising altitude, and you'll see here RE, which is designated as your Reynolds number, our coefficient of friction, which is C subscore F, and our CD naught value, which I have noted here as updated. So our Reynolds number can be solved for by using a very simple equation, which is going to be Reynolds number is equal to rho times V times C divided by 3.74 times 10 to the negative 7th, which is equal to the viscosity of air. And now you all know rho is our air density at whatever altitude we're going to be flying at. V is our velocity for best range, whether that be your MDR or your VBR value from before. And C is our average chord, which is right here. So as you can see, our Reynolds number comes from G4, which is our row value, times level flight B9, which is equal to my drag rise Mach value, and then D9, which right here is our average chord, divided by 3.74 times 10 to the negative 7th. Next, we can plug in our Reynolds number into the coefficient of friction equation, so this one right here, and that equation is CF, or coefficient of friction, is equal to 0.42 divided by the natural log of 0.056 times our Reynolds number, and then you square that value. So as you can see right here in coefficient of friction, we have 0.42 divided by the natural log of 0.056 multiplied by D15, which is our Reynolds number, and then you square that natural log value and you get your coefficient of friction. And now finally we can update our CD0 value by taking the total surface area of the plane, which is noted here as S wet, which can be defined as the total area of the fuselage plus 2 times the total area of each wing plus 2 times the total area of each engine, and later on we can add in the surface area of the tail and the stabilizers, and then we divide that by S ref, which is going to be the same as the area of the wings. So then that again I can show you S wet equals S fuselage plus 2S engine plus 2S ref. So to get S wet, all you're going to really need to do is take the surface area of your fuselage, which you did solve for in the weight section over here. So you take the area of your fuselage and you can add that to the S value over here times 2. And then to find the area of each of your engines, you can take a rough estimate and solve for the surface area of a cylinder. So basically you could do pi r squared and multiply that times the length of your engine, and then you would have the surface area of that, and all you would need to do is multiply it now times 2. So there you have that. And then while we finish solving for CD0, what we're going to be doing here is taking S wet and dividing it by S ref and multiplying that times our coefficient of friction, and that equals CD0. Additionally, if you refer to the equation sheet in the description, you can now find the value for the induced drag coefficient as well as the overall coefficient of drag. And now, just to get this part of the workbook finished up 100%, let's solve for EM, which is going to be our efficiency factor, which later you'll see plays into how well the airplane will be able to glide in an unpowered flight. So EM is equal to 1 divided by 2 times the square root of K times CD0. So as you'll see here in the EM column, EM equals 1 divided by 2 times the square root of D21, which is CD0, multiplied by K, which is B9. Since we now have a fuselage, wings, engines, and a payload, the only other major contributing factor to our total weight is going to be our fuel weight. I know that weight is going to be contributed from the tail and stabilizers, but for now it is rather negligible. So in order to solve for the weight of the fuel that we're going to need, we're going to go to our level flight worksheet and start with the desired range of the aircraft. First, I'll explain all the variables. TSFC is the fuel consumption rating for our specific engine. You can find this information online. You are already familiar with XBR, VBR, and MDR. The Greek letter zeta is how we're going to solve for how much fuel we need. Once we solve for zeta, we can find how much fuel we need and how much it weighs. We can start with the equation XBR equals 0.866 times EM times VBR divided by C multiplied times the natural log of 1 divided by 1 minus zeta. Written out, that looks like XBR is equal to 0.866 times EM times VBR, or in my case MDR, divided by C, and then multiplied by the natural log of 1 over 1 minus zeta. Since this is somewhat tricky to type into Microsoft Excel all at once, I split it up into two different steps. As you can see right here, I have zeta calc 1 and the actual calculation for zeta. But now we can set zeta equal to delta WF over W1. And that's going to look like this. Zeta is equal to delta WF over W1. And delta WF is going to be the change in total weight, and W1 is going to be our initial weight. So keep in mind that's going to be the total weight. So while the weight of the fuel is going to be changing, all of the other weights are going to stay constant. Delta WF is going to be equal to W1 minus W1 times 0.06. The significance of the 0.06 is that you can only use up 94% of your total fuel. But now to solve for our change in weight, we just simply multiply zeta by W1. So now you can see that zeta times W1 also equals W1 minus W1 times 0.06. So now, get rid of all this. And you can see that zeta times W1 equals W1 minus W1 times 0.06. And now if we simplify that out, we get zeta times W1 equals 0.94 times W1. And that calculation right there gives us our weight of our fuel. As you can see right here in my WF and delta W columns, I have this equation right here for my delta W. And for the weight of the fuel, I have B15 multiplied by my total weight divided by 0.94, which if you look right here, if you divide this left side by 0.94, you are left with your weight of fuel. Also, what I did here was in the weight column, if you check out my weight of fuel, you'll notice that it's linked back to the level flight column or level flight worksheet, and that's because if this is ever changing, then it will change here, also changing the total weight, making everything change with it, and that makes the whole workbook enabled to be up to speed at all times. And also another value related to level flight is endurance. So just so we can check that one off the list as well, we can solve for endurance right now. I can show you the equation. It's going to be T max, which is your endurance time, equals EM, which was our efficiency factor from earlier, divided by C, which is our total fuel consumption rating, multiplied by the natural log of 1 divided by 1 minus zeta. And that will give you your endurance. If you look here, we have aerodynamics at cruising altitude D30, and that is our efficiency factor right here. And that is going to be divided by C, which is our TSFC, our fuel consumption rating, multiplied by the natural log of 1 divided by 1 minus level flight B15, which is zeta. So now that we've solved for over 90% of our total weight, I'm going to take you through some calculations for aircraft performance, such as things like service ceiling, bank turns, climb rate, and other things of that nature. Once we solve all of these, I'll show you how to place your wings, stabilizers, and tail, and then we can finalize our aircraft. Okay, let's see now. We have aerodynamics at cruising altitude finished. We have weight finished, unless you wanted to add the weight of your tail and stabilizers, which makes up about less than 5% of the total weight of the aircraft, so it's basically negligible. Landing, we finished earlier. Takeoff, we are done with, except for climb rates, which we will get to in a moment. At level flight, we're all done. We just finished endurance. Tail and stabilizers we'll get to, and the rest of the performance we're going to finish up in just a moment. So first we'll start with our climb rates and our service ceiling calculations. Our service ceiling can simply be calculated by using an equation T over W multiplied by rho over rho at sea level equals 1 over EM. Again, that is T over W multiplied by rho over rho SL for our air density at sea level equals 1 over EM. Now when we simplify that, it simplifies out to rho SL over EM divided by T over W equals the density of air at the altitude of our service ceiling. So what we do next is we take that air density value and we check it in our atmospheric constants table from down in the description for our corresponding ceiling. And you can see right here in my workbook I have 0.00238, which is the density of air at sea level, multiplied by 1 over F4, which is EM, divided by B7, which is T over W. And then I again referred to the atmospheric values table in the description and found that my service ceiling would be 51,750 feet. Next we will solve for two types of climbs, our steepest climb and our fastest climb. Simply put, our steepest climb is the rise rate at the highest angle of attack that our aircraft will travel at, and the fastest climb is the fastest the aircraft will travel vertically. We can solve for the rate of our steepest climb by using three pretty simple equations. And they are, right here, rate of climb, which I have as RC, is equal to V gamma max multiplied by the sine of gamma max. And you can solve for each of those with the next two equations. V gamma max is equal to 2W over S divided by rho to the 1/2 multiplied by k divided by CD naught to the 1/4, and sine of gamma max can be solved for with the equation sine of gamma max equals T over W minus 1 over EM. And if you want to refer back to my workbook, you'll see that in the steepest climb portion, I just have all of this written out in one line. I didn't split it up into different steps. But if you want to with your workbook, that's obviously your choice. Now for the fastest climb calculation, I did split it up into multiple steps because there's a little bit more involved in this calculation. First, I solved for my variable gamma, which is one of the more important parts of this. And as you can see here, gamma is designated in my workbook. The equation for gamma is equal to 1 plus parentheses 1 plus 3 divided by EM times T over W, and that whole thing is squared, and this is to the 1/2. And when you look in my workbook for gamma, you'll see here 1 plus the square root of 1 plus 3 divided by aerodynamics at cruising altitude D30, which is my EM, and my T over W, which is found in my takeoff, climb, and ceiling worksheet right here at B7. Next, we're going to solve for our variable QFC, which is right here in my workbook. So QFC can be set equal to T over W times W over S times gamma divided by 6CD naught. And as you can see here, QFC is equal to B7 times landing B9. So B7 right here is T over W, and landing B9 is W over S. And then D4, which is gamma right here, divided by 6 times aerodynamics at cruising altitude D21, which is CD naught. So that gives you your QFC, and now using that value we can solve for VFC with the equation VFC equals 2 QFC divided by rho at sea level to the 1/2. So if you take a look here, we have the square root of 2 times D7, which is QFC, divided by 0.00238, which is the density of air at sea level. Now that we have VFC, the only other variable we need to solve for is sine gamma FC. Now sine gamma FC is equal to T over W times 1 minus gamma over 6 minus 3 divided by 2 gamma EM squared times T over W. Written out, that looks like this. Sine gamma FC equals T over W times 1 minus gamma over 6 minus 3 divided by 2 gamma EM squared times T over W. Once we have the sine gamma FC value, we just multiply FC times sine of gamma FC to get our rate of climb. And that's going to look like this. Rate of climb for our fastest climb is equal to VFC times sine gamma FC. and you'll see those two values right here, VFC and sin FC, in D10 and D13 respectively. For fastest climb, you'll see D13 times D10. And now that we've got takeoff, climb, and ceiling all finished up, we can head on over to performance, where now we can talk about our bank angle, our turning radius, and our unpowered flight, or our gliding flight. So now before we get going on this worksheet, I'm going to explain all of the variables to you. G, as before, is the force of gravity, so 32.2. N is the load factor for our airplane, so basically what that means is N is going to be equal to lift divided by weight, and we're using a constant value of 1.2, so that means 20% more lift is generated than the weight of the airplane. The bank angle is going to be the maximum angle the plane can be banked at when taking a turn. And if you look here, we can represent the bank angle like this. We can just say, here's the horizon, here's our aircraft. From the back, this angle right here is our bank angle. And we're going to be representing that with the Greek letter phi. And then after we solve for the bank angle, we're going to be solving for the turning radius. So basically, if you take a reference point here, and we have our airplane right here, the turning radius is going to be this value right here. And lastly, x unpowered, which is the distance the airplane will be able to travel if the engines were cut. So let's say the engines get turned off, how far is the plane going to glide, essentially? And actually, we can solve for that right now. The equation is x, I'm just going to say unpow, equals EM multiplied by height 1 minus height 2. And since our height 2 is going to be 0, so how far could it glide until it reaches the ground, we're just going to call h1 our cruising altitude, and h2 we can say is 0. So if you take a look here, x unpowered is equal to EM right here multiplied by my cruising altitude. Alright, so now let's solve for our bank angle, and remember bank angle is going to be designated by the Greek letter phi. So N is equal to 1 over cosine of phi. So we can determine that cosine of phi is equal to 1 over n. Thus, inverse cosine of 1 over n is going to be equal to our bank angle phi. And if we take a look back over here on the workbook, bank angle is equal to inverse cosine of 1 over b6, which is our load factor right here, and then we're going to translate it from radians into degrees, and we have a bank angle of 33.557 degrees. So next, to solve for our turning radius, we're going to have to solve for a turning velocity and the dynamic pressure that will be applied to the aircraft as a result of the turn. From these velocities, we will cross-check them with our coefficients of lift to make sure that it doesn't exceed our CL max, and also check our drag rise Mach to make sure we don't exceed the speed of sound during this turn. The two equations critical for this step are as follows. Dynamic pressure, Q, equals 1/2 rho v squared, which also equals, and this is a long one, T over W times W over S divided by 2 CD naught multiplied by 1 plus or minus, and that's the reason we're going to have multiple velocities and multiple dynamic pressures, So again, plus or minus, now parentheses, 1 minus 4k CD naught times n squared, our load factor squared, divided by T over W squared. And all of that is raised to the 1/2, close parentheses. So what we're going to be doing first is taking this large half right here and dividing it by 1/2 rho, and then taking the square root of that to find both of our velocities. And then from there we're going to check them against our drag rise Mach to make sure they're not exceeding the speed of sound. So if we go back over here to the workbook, we can see our dynamic pressure over here. It exceeds the speed of sound. So we're going to take our second dynamic pressure, which is a result of the 1 minus over here, and see that turning speed is going to be a lot slower and much more feasible for our aircraft. Now additionally, if you refer back to the equation sheet, you can check with our CL and our CL max, and you can see that with this turning speed, your CL will not exceed our CL max from the Aerodynamics worksheet over here, CL max. So now our last step is just simply to find our turning radius, which can be done by taking turning radius R is going to be equal to the velocity we determined to be most feasible for our aircraft, which for me was our lower one, divided by G times the square root of our load factor N squared minus 1. So if we take a look back on the workbook, I'm going to go over here to performance, and turning radius equals C15 squared, which is our turning speed, divided by B3, which is our gravitational factor right here, times the square root of B6 squared minus 1, which is our load factor squared minus 1. In the final steps of our design, we're going to now be sizing and placing the vertical tail and horizontal stabilizers on the rear of our aircraft. To start, we are going to need to determine the location of the center of gravity of our fuselage. The way I did this was by making a cardboard cutout of the top of my fuselage and pushing it over the edge of a table to determine at what point we were going to have the center of gravity. So from this point, you can determine from your scale cardboard cutout to your actual desired size of your fuselage, you can place the quarter chord of your wing on that center of gravity. So if you go back and you look at the aerodynamics spreadsheet, what you can find there is your root chord. So right here, root chord, you're going to divide that by 4, and you're going to find the center of gravity, and you're going to place 3/4 of your root chord behind the center of gravity, and 1/4 of your root chord in front of the center of gravity. And now the way we can find our location of tail and stabilizer placement is by the relationship of two very simple equations. They're going to be CVT, which is a constant, equals L, which is the distance between the quarter chord of the wing and the quarter chord of the tail and stabilizers, times SVT, which is going to be the surface area of our vertical tail, divided by the span of our wing multiplied by the surface area of our wing. And the second equation is going to be CHT, another constant, equals the same L multiplied by the area of our horizontal tails, or our stabilizers, divided by the average chord of our wing multiplied by, again, the area of our wing. So from here we'll be able to solve for L, and then after that we can simply just start solving for the rest of the details of the tail and stabilizers, which involve the surface area of each respectively and the wingspan of each respectively, along with the average chord, the quarter chord, the root chord, the tip chord. And then we can just solve for these variables right here by using the same equations that we used for the wings before. Thanks guys so much for watching. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns or anything of that nature, please leave them down below for me in the comments section. Also check out Aircraft Design, A Conceptual Approach by Daniel Raymer. This is where I got a lot of my information for the video, including a lot of the constants that you might not know where they came from. And of course, there's also the atmospheric constants sheet and the formula sheet that I'll leave for you in the description. And one more thing, guys, just to recap, the purpose of this was not to give you a fully functional and perfectly aerodynamic aircraft. It's just to get a place to start for a shorter amount of time that will eventually cut down the design process. Please stay tuned for some more videos, and thanks again, guys.